Welcome to Speedrunner Reviews. In this series I'll be analysing and reviewing games using the mindset of speedrunning. This video will look at the game from three perspectives. First, the casual experience, which is how most people will first play the game. This will look like a condensed standard review. Next we'll discuss the speedrun experience, including all the interesting tech and how well the game holds up as a speed game. Finally, we'll look at the tool-assisted speedrun, showing what the game looks like when pushed to the theoretical limit. If you already know the game and want to jump straight to the speedrun part, I've left timestamps in the description. Today we're looking at Asterix on the Master System, which is a pretty standard platformer and lots of fun. You get to choose between Asterix and Obelix for each level, and it creates a bit of variety in the game. Before I get stuck into it, if you end up enjoying this video, please consider subscribing to keep up to date. I'm hoping to continue making these and subscriptions help out a lot.
Now I want to talk a bit about the weirdness of the version differences in this game. In fact, there's quite a few different games called Asterix on the Master System, and I'll just be talking today about the one called Asterix with no subtitle to it, but it doesn't stop people getting these mixed up. So it seems that this was one of the earlier Asterix games and also one of the better Asterix games. You can see it's just a pretty stock standard platformer where you run around and jump. This cartridge of Asterix just says Asterix on the front, and I've had it since a very long time ago. I think when I was about 11 or 12 I bought it at a garage sale along with like a Super Nintendo and a bunch of other stuff. But in preparation for the video I thought, you know what, I'll buy a box copy, and I've wanted a box copy for a long time because it's a game that I care a lot about. This box copy seemed to be the right version of Asterix, and as you can see, like on the back, it's got all the different levels that are actually in the game Asterix. Of course, when I opened up the box copy, I get this random cartridge, which is Asterix, but it's Asterix and the Great Rescue. Just before we look at the actual game itself though, I want to point out some of the really cool things about buying games secondhand, especially in Australia. Most Master System games came with this like phone number thing on the front, which you could call for tips. Pretty sure it doesn't work anymore. And then it comes with like the name on the top. I do prefer the version with just the red grid with the writing on it, but you don't always get that. I also want to point out the lovely Video Easy sticker on the sides, which is a defunct video store. Of course, that business is not as sustainable as it once was. I also want to point out this box here. I bought this cartridge from Cash Converters, and if you live in Australia, I absolutely love Cash Converters. It's basically like a second-hand store, and it has all this kind of stuff in it, plus a whole bunch of like lawnmowers and foot massages. But it's also got like all these stickers on the front from when it was an ex-rental at one point. So there's about 3 different prices on this thing, but of course it's going up in price because I paid about $50 for this. Anyway, I popped in this cartridge that I got from Cash Converters thinking that it would be the same copy that I have, but as you can see, it is a 100% completely different game. This is Asterix and the Great Rescue. I've never played through that much of it, but in my opinion, it is not as solid of a game as the original Asterix. You can already tell it's pretty laggy, and it seems to have like a different HUD and kind of different game mechanics. Immediately you come to a locked door, so it's more of like a puzzle game than it is a platformer game. It's pretty bizarre, since this box seems to be the box for the version of Asterix that I had growing up, but maybe they got swapped in the store or something like that. But it can be pretty confusing trying to track down this game for that reason.
So the main gimmick of this game is whether you play as Asterix or Obelix, and the first 2 levels you're forced to play as a particular one, but then after that, each level you get a choice. Asterix is a lot smaller and nimble, but less powerful in breaking blocks, so you'll find with Asterix you're often picking up these potions like this red one I have here on the top right. Asterix can throw these potions and it sort of creates a few little cool effects. For example, if we want to get across a pool of water, like this one coming up here, we throw a potion into it and it creates sort of this little whirlpool-y ripple thing that you can jump on and get out of that water. It's pretty fun to play around with all the things these potions can do, and that's sort of how the Asterix gameplay works. On the other hand, if you choose to play as Obelix, you'll find that he's a lot stronger in terms of breaking blocks. So you can see here, these blocks you'd normally need a potion to break through with Asterix, but with Obelix you just punch them and then jump and maybe headbutt them or ground pound through them, and you'll make your way through. Obelix tends to be a little bit quicker than Asterix for this reason, but then he slows down a little bit more because Obelix is a bigger character, which tends to make the game lag quite a bit. If you're anything like me, then you'll probably end up playing most of the game as Asterix. Given it's a smaller character, it's easier to avoid hits, but sometimes you end up in situations like this where you have to awkwardly throw potions and try and like break blocks on moving platforms. That section is way easier with Obelix. but Asterix is just a massive pain. There's also one level that I never figured out how to beat with Asterix, and if I ever go into that level, it's actually a big pain, because the only way to get back out of the level is getting a game over. So if you pick the wrong character, you're going to have to take a bunch of deaths, get a game over, and continue for you to actually retry that level as the different character. Although the game goes level to level, it can get pretty non-linear at times. For example, with Asterix here, we can go down this and take the secret path underneath the level. Sometimes there's goodies down these paths, and sometimes there's even extra bosses that you can fight, which can increase your maximum health. It adds a bit more variety to the game. And this sort of underground path reminds me of a certain particular game on the NES. Now, this open-endedness can be fun, but I think Asterix says it best here, we're lost. So sometimes you can get lost in the levels, they can get pretty confusing, but usually the levels are fairly short, so even if you get lost, there's only so many options you can take before you find the right one, so the variety that it makes is kind of worth sometimes getting lost in my opinion. The game has some cool gimmicks like this level where you kind of slide on this oil slick to get through. And also this other level here which kind of messes with the lightning. This also reminds me of another particular game on the Super Nintendo. The game is based on comic book characters, and while I've never really read the comics myself, they have created sort of a colourful universe for these characters to occupy on the Master System. The graphics are really nice for the time, and the game is altogether put together pretty well. It's not actually that laggy despite Asterix being pretty big, and all the mechanics sort of work as intended. It does feel good to play the game. It's got a bit of catchy music in there, and you'll often get it stuck in your head too. Although I think the game could have done with a tiny bit more polish. You'll find at the start of the game that there are bosses in each level, but that only goes up to World 4, and there's about 8 or 9 worlds in this game. So halfway through the game, they basically just stop doing bosses in any of the levels, which is pretty strange. Even the last level of the game isn't really a boss, it's just sort of an auto-scroller where you have to dodge obstacles. Kind of an anticlimax to an otherwise pretty enjoyable game. Though the game definitely does have a lot of depth and does have its charm. All the levels are pretty well put together and they've got well thought out obstacles. You've also got fun little characters like this jar here that's going to turn evil and try and chase you and eat you. Normally jars don't do that, but towards the end of the game they will. This is actually a pretty big game as well, especially for the Master System. Even world record speedruns are over 20 minutes, so there's a lot of game to sink your teeth into here. And once you've played it once, you can always go back and play it with the other character that you didn't use for those levels. For example, if you play with Asterix, go back and play with Asterix. You get more gameplay out of it. Overall, I really would recommend playing this one. Put it plain and simple, it is just a really solid platformer for the Master System. So now let's have a look at the speedrun. You can see the leaderboard here and it's actually fairly active. Corbett there is sitting on top with a pretty optimal time and it's got a fair few runners. This game was actually recently featured in something called the Master 8 race. This is a race of 8 different Master System games and Asterix was a part of this. You can see the Master 8 race there and I'm actually running in the Master 8 race on the bottom left, which is pretty exciting. So in Asterix, all we had to do was get to the end of level 4-3, not beat the entire game. But since the Master 8 race, I've been running it a little bit more, and so have a few other people like Arnold. I've actually snagged myself a 3rd place time, potentially, since the race, but it's not yet verified, so we'll just have to wait and see. But it's been a pretty fun game to run through, and today we'll be looking at Corbett's run, which is the world record. So Corbett's run will start off with this plain old Asterix level and you're pretty much just running to the right. It looks like a pretty boring speed game when you first see it, but trust me, it does get a lot more interesting. In terms of optimization, Corbett's run is pretty good. I remember picking this up for the Master 8 race and I was having a real difficult time actually matching some of these levels. When opening jars and damaging enemies, you can either punch them or ground pound on them with your fist. And this boss is an example of that. You can see Corbett punching the boss there. The reason for the punch is you can make contact a little bit quicker than a ground pound. If you think about it, the punch kind of comes out to the right with a hitbox, so you don't have to move as far right to hit the boss there. Boss strategies are pretty straightforward. All you really need to do is just hit them when they stop blinking. You wait for their iframes to stop, you keep hitting them again. So in the next level, Corbett is going to play as Obelix. Now the movement here with Obelix is very similar. The only issue is Obelix can cause a lot more lag. So there's a little cycle here that Corbett's going to try and make, and then Obelix, the main ability with him is just breaking blocks a lot easier. So you can see there Obelix is just punching through the blocks, whereas if you came across that with Asterix, you'd be in for a really bad time. Corbett's about to do a cool trick called a corner boost. You'll see Corbett will break the blocks there and then jump up. Usually you can't make a jump that high, but when you bonk your head on a corner, you get clipped out to the left there and also a little bit up. So also if you jump into a corner, it can boost you a bit forward too. This boss is pretty random. You're going to get one boss that has a circle, and it's usually more on the left hand side. If you don't get it with your first hit, you can try hitting the other two, but if it's on the third one, you're going to lose time because you hit it and then it takes a little while to come into the ground. Asterix now has the red potion here in the top right in the next level, and we'll see it in action soon. So one of the things the red potion can do is to create a path across the water. What Corbett's going to want to do is throw the potion from as far away as possible, because really what you're waiting on is that potion exploding. You'll get a short throw if you just hold up and throw it, but you get a fast throw if you're sort of like running at the same time. Of course, it wouldn't be a speedrun game without an obligatory auto-scroller section. This one's pretty unfortunate that it's in the game so early, but also it's fairly short. You might be wondering why Obelix is used in an auto-scroller even though it's laggier, and Corbett made this comment themselves. They said the Obelix probably shouldn't have been used here. It's a bit of a tricky one because the key is in a much better position for getting in the door with Obelix, so I reckon Obelix is actually faster in a TAS setting where you can do a lot of lag reduction, but maybe not in RTA. The next level coming up is 2-3, and it's one of the more interesting levels at the start of the run. So we've got to be really careful of health throughout this level. You'll see dodging fireballs where possible is used, and turning left to damage boost to the right. There's a really tricky jump coming up here where you jump up over the lava without hitting it, and that's pretty optimal because you don't want to lose health by hitting the lava. You can then bounce on this bat and fireball and make it through. So that was a very impressive display through the first bit of the level, and because Corbett has another bit of health, you can use a damage boost sort of up in this top room there. After this we have this icy world. This one's pretty straightforward. The levels are quite linear except for there's these snowballs that come and try and hit you on the head. They don't slow you down too much because you just have to like hold left to go right or hold right to go left. But what does slow you down is because it's an extra sprite on screen, it does cause a lot of extra lag. So if you can avoid these snowballs, it's really good to do so. There's also this bit here where you wait for the water and then jump on top of it. Some people have got some pretty glitchy effects by jumping at different times. It seems to be a pretty broken part of the game and has some potential for making for some further glitches, I reckon. Going with the theme of this game, we're going to jump over this wall here and take a shortcut. This one is intended since they put a door there, but not many people would know about it just playing this game casually. That thing there is interesting where there's two jars as well. The key is in a random jar, so you sort of have to jump on both and guess which one it is. We'll talk more about those in the TAS section. Again, we got more skips coming up which involve just jumping over walls that you maybe shouldn't be jumping over. This one I think is intended as well, but it's just amazing how the runners have found so many of these intended skips throughout the game. Really cool to see. Now 4-1 is a pretty interesting level. It's the first level in this game that's pretty non-linear, and it's got all these falling mud sections. You can see Corbett there getting out of the mud pretty optimally just by jumping up through it, and that's not very easy to do. But what I want to talk about here is bat skip. When Corbett comes out of the door, the bat's going to be coming around, and Obelix will be trying to jump on it there. So you sort of jump on the bat and then bounce on it over the wall, and that door is the end of the level. Now the bat movement is completely RNG whether it goes up or down, so sometimes you can go to do your run and the bat just moves down and you can't do this skip and you lose probably like 30-40 seconds due to it. So it's a pretty unfortunate thing about running this game RTA, and it's one of the things that frustrated me a lot, but it also makes it more interesting because 4-1 can be pretty tense. I just want to point out with this level, it's really cool how they use the red potions where you just put one in a cannon and then it shoots you out from the cannon. I really like it. Coming up in Corbett's run is 4-3, and it's one of the more complicated levels in the run. You're going to go down this little pot here and then get a frame perfect jump over the wall. If you miss that frame perfect jump, you're going to hit that plant and die, so you've got to be really careful with how that goes. There's also this small section coming up. Obelix shouldn't really be in this little bit of the level here, but you can duck under this little roof and make your way through anyway. There's something really weird about how Obelix behaves in this level though. When he dies in this section, he warps back up into a much higher area of the level. So this area here where he is basically just above where we were before. If you die there with Asterix, you don't warp here, so it's pretty strange how this works. Again, we're going to do some more jumping over the walls and then sort of make the way to the end of the level. So this level with the frame perfect jump is one of the more stressful levels in the run, and that frame perfect jump is pretty hard to time. If you miss it, like each time you miss it, you lose about 10 seconds. So if you're trying to get a good run, it's pretty much over as soon as you miss it. The other thing I want to point out about this game is that there aren't any maps available online for it. Well, there are for like the first 2 levels, but that's it. So it's really hard to route this game and find skips actually. So somebody maybe producing maps of the game would help a lot with the speed scene here. I always think of the end of 4-3 as a really interesting point, because that's the end of where we got up to in the Master 8 race, but the game keeps going on after that. Corbet's going to do a really cool skip here on the snake and the bat, and that is a lot harder than it looks, because you have to get very perfect bounces off those two. Damage boosting in this game can be exploited as well. Just by turning left before you hit this green sludge, you can get boosted to the right instead. So you'll see that all over the run and all over the Taz as well. 5-3 can be kind of annoying because when these little crushes hit the ground, they make Obelix bounce up and down like that. And you've also got these crushing walls to avoid. But you can then skip the last bit of 5-3 just by bouncing on this thing and going over the roof. It's pretty funny, but it skips that intended block puzzle through there. At the end of 5-3, you get this room with the spiders here, and quite honestly, I find this to be one of the hardest rooms in the game not to die in. The big issue here is actually where the key is. So you'll see Obelix is going to fall down and grab the key in this jar. Getting out of this little area is pretty difficult. Corbet's done an awesome spider bounce there to make it through, but that's a lot harder than it looks. 6-1 is a pretty boring water level without too much to say about it, but 6-2 gets pretty interesting. We have this ship here, and we're going to ride the anchor up and sort of go onto the ship. Now the screen is locked from scrolling any more right at this point, but once you get up onto that screen with the ship, it is unlocked to scroll right. The reason being because you have to move right on the ship there. But it's still unlocked right now even though we fell back down. We probably shouldn't have fallen back down, but there you go. We can jump on top of the ship there and just make it to the end of the level. So that's probably one of the biggest skips in the run, and it skips like the entire level, which is really awesome. And the level's pretty bad as well, so I was pleased to see this skip. Now I remember playing this game casually. 6-3 was probably the hardest level. Like I had the most trouble with this one. It's mainly because of that lava rising section, but then it's also because of this section with the platform. This platform behaves really weirdly. When you're holding right, the platform's going to speed up to the right. If you let go, it's going to slow down, and if you press left, it's going to slow down even more. This applies whether you're on the platform, and even if you're not on the platform. So when you drop off to get the key here, it can be really tricky, because you want to be holding right to run into the key, but that'll make the platform sort of zoom away from you, and then you miss the platform and you can't complete this section. So it's a pretty difficult part of the game, unless you go really slow. 7-1 has these cool little sections where you're sliding on the oil on the ground, but apart from that, there's not a whole lot to say about interesting stuff in this level. 7-2 is another fairly non-linear level. It can be pretty confusing where to go. You can see Corbett turning left to damage boost through there, and Corbett's going to do a frame perfect jump here to get on top of the roof. That one sort of has a visual cue to line up, so I actually find it a bit easy to get this one. And also if you miss that frame perfect jump, you only lose about 3 or 4 seconds, so it's not a big deal at all. And 7-3 is the last real proper level of the run. In the Taz I found out doing this with Asterix was a bit faster, but doing it with Asterix in an RTA speedrun is very difficult to do. There's a few tricky jumps that you basically can't make consistently, so that's why Obelix is used here. Obelix is slower because of the lag, but also a bit slower because of these spike puzzles here. You have to damage boost through a lot of them pretty carefully, and it can actually be pretty easy to die as well, so you have to be careful with that. Coming up here is one of the biggest skips in the run. I'm not sure if it's intended or not, but you can make it up onto this roof here with Obelix and then jump across. You'll make it across past this door, and if you look sort of below, you'll see that falling block puzzle. You're supposed to sort of stand on each block and then wait for the next one to fall. The whole sequence takes a really long time. I haven't timed it, but I think it's like 30 seconds or a minute or something, so skipping that is very welcome. So Corbet's going to finish out the run here and then stop timing when Asterix gets booted off the horse. This level's pretty much an auto-scroller, so I found when I was running this game RTA, I was pretty much matching Corbet's time through the level every single time I played this. In fact, I found out when running this RTA, there's literally a spot that you can sit and just hold right, and you'll never get hit by anything. So it makes this level absolutely trivial and a pretty weird end to the run, but at least it's not some hectic, stressful end to the run. Okay, so now we're launching into the TAS station. The TAS we'll look at today is the TAS that I've just very recently submitted, and it's in 2402.96. Before I launch into this, I want to give a very big shout out to Johnny Prio's original TAS of 2620. Now, this TAS was submitted over 10 years ago, so it's a testament to how well Johnny did that I'm only like 2 minutes faster. In the whole time of 10 years, that's all the time that was able to be saved. So this TAS laid a lot of groundwork for the game, and the TAS that I did sort of went through and adapted what RTA runners had found into making a more modern run for this game. One thing I really need to mention quickly is the timing. So you'll see my TAS timing is a 24:02, which you might notice is actually longer than the RTA run we watched before. The reason for this is because TAS timing has to go to last input, and there's this bit right at the end of the credits where you have to press the button to continue on. So you have to watch the entire credits in the TAS, and that's counted in the timing, whereas in RTA you just stop timing as soon as you booted off the horse in the last level. So if you actually line them up perfectly, I save 115 seconds over the RTA world record, which is about 2 minutes. But you should never really compare TAS and RTA because they're very different concepts. Alright, so let's launch into the TAS here. There's nothing absolutely crazy from the get-go, it's really just running right. But what we'll see later on this level is a little corner boost. So I mentioned corner boosts before, where you sort of jump up into a corner. Those are going to be turned up to 11 in the TAS. So there's this little bit coming up here where I go under these 4 blocks and boost out of the corner there. That saves maybe 1 or 2 frames. And given there's 60 frames in a second, it's not a lot, but these all add up over time. Tricky thing about that corner boost, of course, is it's an enemy, so it's sort of a corner boost / damage boost. But damage boosts don't speed you up at all, so it's the corner boost that saves time there. The second level forces you to play as Obelix, and I make this really cool cycle at the start. So normally you're not able to make this cycle because it's pretty tight, but you can see I jump on the platform twice, get on the very end of it and jump off. These blocks here I can break optimally just by sort of spacing my punches. There's optimal times to do punches. You'll see I'll get a corner boost at the end of this, and then you're going to see a lot of duck jumping. So in this game with Obelix, it's really laggy because Obelix is big. How do you make Obelix smaller? Well, you duck, because then there's less Obelix to draw on screen. So the whole run, I'm just going to be duck jumping as Obelix to reduce lag, and it looks absolutely bonkers, but it's optimal. One thing to mention about duck jumping with Obelix as well is that RTA runners have started to pick it up. I know when I was doing runs after making this TAS, I did it quite a lot during the runs, and I know other people have started to do it as well. It's pretty difficult to do because if you duck too early before you jump, you can lose a bit of time, but with the amount of lag that you save, it's worth it more often than not. One thing to keep in mind with duck jumping, of course, is you only want to do it in actual laggy areas. If you start doing duck jumps everywhere with Obelix, you are going to lose time. You can see in the TAS I picked Obelix for the auto-scroller, which is kind of like what I mentioned before. Obelix's key is in a much better spot for the end of the level. You'll also notice me only breaking 1 or 2 blocks at a time, and that's because if you break a whole stack by ground pounding, it makes a huge lag spike all at once. Whereas if you break just 1 or 2, you might get a couple lag frames, but nothing too major. You'll see me duck jumping all the way through here. So if you just try and play through this level with Obelix normally, you're not going to have a good time. You're just going to lose a bunch to lag in the scrolling. But I don't get very many lag frames at all here, and then the key being in the better spot makes it very worth it to do it with Obelix in the TAS. One cool thing about breaking blocks is when I break this next block, have an eye on the left side of the screen. You'll notice that I sort of broke the left side of the screen when I break the blocks. It's kind of weird how that works, but yeah, essentially the game wraps around the screen for you. So when you break something that's hanging off the right side of the screen, it affects the left side of the screen too. Pretty weird. Now this is 2-3 again. You know, remember that I praised the RTA run for how well they handled this level. It turns out that the TAS can do something really fancy in this level that was not in the run. So I'm going to damage boost through a lot of that fire and take the first part of the level normally. Normally the RTA run would proceed left at this point, but what I'm going to do is get this bat, and we're going to do another bat skip. Now this one is a lot harder than the other bat skip we saw, but if you can manipulate the bat to go up properly, you're going to skip this huge chunk of the level up here and save a lot of time. I think all things considered, this level is about 15 seconds faster than the RTA run, so this is where I save the bulk of my time over RTA. Some people have done that bat skip in practice, but it's pretty difficult to do, so you sort of only want to do it if you're on a bad run or something like that. But I think one day it will be required for world record given the way this game's going. Now RTA runners are on the fence about 3-1 about whether to use Asterix or Obelix, but I found this little skip that's pretty much TAS only here where you duck and jump, and you actually skip breaking all those blocks there. So for that reason Obelix was faster in the TAS, but I'm still not sure about RTA where you can't do that skip, whether he's faster or not. This boss here has a small optimization where I make it jump to the left right at the start of the fight. Otherwise I'd have to sort of go all the way to the right before I could hit it, and this way I can just hit it straight away, so that's really good. Now in 4-1 I went down this little blue pot and it sort of did this weird visible glitch where everything sort of moved to the right. I'm not sure if that has any application, but it was kind of cool to have in the TAS. We'll see here the same bat skip we had in RTA. Now you can manipulate the bat pretty much any way you want in the TAS. Just by moving slightly differently you'll be able to change whether it goes up or down each time, so you can make it do pretty much whatever you want. I just made sure to bounce on it as early as possible to make it across the wall as early as possible. Now this is 4-3 and you can see it's pretty similar to the RTA route. We get that frame perfect jump across and make our way through with Obelix. You'll see a lot of duck jumping here, and you can actually duck jump pretty perfectly under the wall there. So this one was really fun to put together in the TAS, and it saves a little bit of time just on movement. Now normally RTA would go left and take a death there, but it turns out with Obelix it was actually a lot faster to go right here by about a second overall. So I go right here and sort of take a more intended path through the level without a death warp. I actually found a little skip in this next room that got me to an out of bounds area. There's these falling rocks and you can make it over the wall in that area. When I got to this out of bounds area, it looked sort of like an unused area, which was similar to something later in the level. So that was cool to find, but unfortunately wasn't useful to save any time. This level here looks almost identical to RTA. You get the snake and the bat. In RTA, if you ever miss that bat, you can just go on a second one later. The bird will swoop down and drop the key. I want to hit the bird as late as possible, so you'll see I sort of hang out on this right hand side and hit it there. The reason being is just like a small TAS optimization thing. Since the bird moves faster than Asterix, you can make it have the key to the left, but then you're going to have to walk all the way back to the right after grabbing the key. Or you can just wait for the bird to move to the right, which is going to be faster than you could do it. So that's why you wait for it to be as right as possible there. In this level here, we bounce out on the trampoline. It's really common to go up 2 screens there, so you bounce up onto this screen and then up onto the next one. I think it has something to do with how far to the right you've gone. RTA runners are really good at avoiding that double screen bounce, but doing the TAS, it actually took me quite a long time to avoid it. I'm not sure if they have some special secret to it or if I was just trying to do it maybe a bit too fast, but yeah, that was a tricky part of the TAS to do. In this room with the spiders, I'm going to RNG manipulate the spiders to go in a particular direction. So wherever I need the spiders to be is where they're going to end up. You can see I got to bounce off that one there because I couldn't make it to the middle here. And I'm going to get a bounce off that one to make it to the platform with the correct cycle. So it actually saves a lot of time being able to manipulate the spiders, but you could never really do that consistently in RTA. I actually killed an extra spider there, and it actually did lose me time. It lost about 2 frames. I'm going to talk about why that is later. This here's level 6-1, which I didn't show too much in the RTA section. There's not a whole lot interesting going on here except for corner boosting and damage boosting through the green slimes. You have to slow down a little bit to avoid that fire, and it's all about doing it optimally. This is another situation where we sort of have 2 chests. There would have been another one there, and the key is going to be in one of the 2, and it's sort of based on RNG. Again, here we have this anchor skip, which you sort of like unlock the scrolling by jumping up onto the screen and then jumping back down. So the way you do that is you do a jump that's not high enough to make it onto the ship. But we'll come across here. You'll see another 2 jar situation, and the key's going to be in the jar on the left. That's a lot faster since I don't want to go all the way to the right to get the key. Now, how did I manipulate the key to be in the jar on the left? It seems to be dependent on your score. So that's actually why I killed the bat back in 5-3. It gave me an extra 100 points, I think, and that was enough to sort of change where the key was, whether it was in the left or the right jar. This level is one of the more difficult ones to Taz, mainly due to the amount of lag. You've got all these enemies popping up here which are extremely laggy, but it's often not worth killing them because they drop their body and this cactus suit, and that's 2 sprites, which is more than 1 sprite. So you usually kill enemies to make sure the sprite goes away, but in that case it didn't really help at all. One thing that I'll mention about when we do end up killing enemies is I want to make sure they don't drop any items. You'll notice that one there didn't drop an item, and that one there did drop the health, but I needed the health. The reason you don't want them to drop items is because, well, items are another sprite and they cause lag on screen. So there's constantly RNG manipulation going on whenever I ground pound on an enemy to make sure it doesn't drop something. This is pretty important. I don't have to do it if it's not a laggy area, but more often than not I do need to manipulate to make that happen. This section here is just going to be a small example of the kind of optimizations we see in a Taz. I'm turning left before hitting each fire, but you probably can't even see it because it's only for 1 frame, so it just goes really quick. And then here I'm just going to get a corner boost off these blocks before going down this section. All those little small things just add up to save that bit of extra time. Again, we have this 7-3 level and I've taken Asterix instead of Obelix. This jump here is really difficult with Asterix to do. So that's one of the reasons why we don't do RTA. We'll see another jump there is more difficult as well later. But you'll notice here with Asterix, the rest of the level actually goes really smoothly. There's not a whole lot of obstacles to avoid, so you can make it through a lot faster than Obelix for that reason. This room here is sort of waiting on the platform, but I got this really cool clip into the wall, and you'll notice that came out on the left side of the screen. Those clips are actually being investigated right now by the RTA runners and potentially could end up saving a lot of time. All you need to do is get into like a small gap with Asterix and then stand up and sort of get zipped to the right. This is the other clip that's sort of harder with Asterix. You sort of damage boost on that and jump over the wall, and that skips the falling block tile. I've tried that a few times RTA and I haven't been able to pull it off once, so I think for now Obelix is going to be the best person to use for this level. So that's going to be pretty much it for this Taz showing. So this level's, not too complicated, it's an auto scroller, but occasionally I will jump to reduce some lag where possible. It only works in some situations though. So yeah, that's pretty much it, but I'm really excited to see what the community comes up with. Since publishing this Taz and since having the Master 8 race, there's been a lot of interest in this game, and I know that runners are pretty actively grinding the time down and finding new skips and tricks and stuff. Especially with that clipping technique that I showed you in the last level, I think that's got a lot of potential and might be able to save quite a bit of time if we can find some useful spots to do it. But there's no maps for this game, so I'd really like to see some maps before we kind of grind down and find a lot of skips with that sort of stuff. So exciting times for the game Asterix, and I was really happy to put up this Taz when I did. It's a pretty fun one to Taz as well because it's got some solid mechanics and it's pretty enjoyable. I'd recommend picking up this game RTA if you haven't played it before. It's got a few frustrating frame perfect jumps, but aside from that it's a pretty solid platformer and you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I know I definitely did myself. Again, if you enjoyed this content, then a subscription would be appreciated. It helps me grow out the channel. And thanks so much for watching.